And now, without further ado, we have the final fireside chat of our 2-day conference. And this will be with the Cardano Foundation. So please, a big round of applause for Bjarke and Frederik as they take the stage and they talk about from open source to open governance. Thank you all. Big round of applause.
Checking the mic and it's on. Great. Thanks everyone. My name is Bjarke Smith-Meyer. I was here yesterday, but in case it's the first time you see me, the fintech correspondent at Politico, and we're here for a fireside chat without the fire, which is a bummer for us Danes because we like our hygge. Unfortunately, we don't have that today, but we'll make it work in any case. But thank you all for your applause. As mentioned, this is Frederik Gregaard, but to those who aren't in the Danish world, that'd probably be Fred Gregaard. Is that how the Americans say it a lot of the time?
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah, it works.
that's better than the French.
All right, Fred. Okay. So we're here to talk about Web3.
Yeah.
Super exciting.
Yeah.
The future.
Yeah.
What is it?
Well, it's a fantastic question, right? It's one of those synonymous or terminologies which is kind of being washed out. But it holds a promise. It holds a promise of a different business model than Web 2. So it was never intended that Web 2 should be centralized. And when you look at Web 2 today, you have very, very few centralized actors who control the whole internet and earn the majority of the money on the internet. And for most people, they don't actually know, but it's like there's a few servers, and then when you start taking them out of the equation, well, that's it. So we can't do much about the actual infrastructure of the internet as such, but we can do something about the business models. And Web3...
Just to make sure that everyone is on the same page, because I mean, when I understand Web 2, I mean, I guess we should start with Web 1. Web 1 was basically where someone write a nice blog, you'd go on, you'd have a look, and that was it. And then Web 2 is where you interact, right? Like that's where your Facebooks and everything come in, your Twitters.
Yeah, that's sort of the social economy.
Yeah.
And that's also the free economy, right?
Right.
So that's this notion that most of us, we think about anything on the internet is sort of free, right? So we have a free Gmail account, we have free Google Docs, right? We have free access to satellite photos. We sort of we can navigate the whole internet for free. But what we're not really thinking about is that we're actually being cornered on the internet. It's capturing our attention and our data is constantly being sold. And I think the European Parliament and others have done some really great regulation. Whether the implementation of that was that good is a different question, but they've definitely raised the question about, is this business model really the best for the consumers? And we see that it's actually separating the population. So we're creating a larger divide than we had in the last 10, 20 years among different community groups. Because the machine learning and the algorithms who runs in the back end of Web 2 basically optimizes for you to come into a rabbit hole and get caught on a topic. So if you like guns or something like that and you click on that a few times, you suddenly get into this rabbit hole of guns or cats or bicycles or whatever that is. And it starts shaping your view of the world. And the problem is because everything is free and everything is commoditized, it doesn't cost you a lot also to give you false information or not accurate information. And you nearly have no way of verifying whether the information is correct, which is a problem also for journalists, right? Because how do I know that what you're writing is accurate and is based on the journalistic principles and is not based on clickbait or based on that you have to sell advertisement or you have to do certain things?
You're putting me under pressure here, yeah.
Obviously, right? So Web3 is basically the notion that by using a new technology called blockchain, that we can change this operating model upside down and start taking back the control of not just our own data, but also our own identity.
Okay.
And there was a lot of talk about that several years ago, and it sort of died out. But now we are sort of at a striking moment where some of the large problems about the infrastructure of Web3 has been solved. And we are actually able to deliver on that promise.
So, I mean, what you describe is, I get it, but whenever I hear about Web3, I think about the metaverse, right? Like, I mean, that in crypto, I mean, that's how I kind of generally feel about it. And it's about like owning real estate in, Mark Zuckerberg's new vision of the world. I mean, am I just being like completely led astray here?
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
So the thing is that people like user experiences. People like to touch and feel, and people like to have the hormones sparking in your brain, right? We are like, born out of very different needs, but we all we want instant gratification. So then there's a few people like me and the Cardano Foundation. We're spun up a little bit differently. We think about infrastructure, what allows you to do certain things and what incentives you to do certain things. And the metaverse as such has been a dream. Again, it's very old. The first time I did something in the metaverse was sort of 15 years ago. I was a banker. My bank opened a branch in the metaverse. It was called Second Life back then. I had an ugly avatar. I had to be in there for 8 hours and trying to sell banking products. It was horrible, right? But now with virtual reality and other technologies, we are having a promise of a better user experience. Now, whether we choose not to interact physically with each other like we do now here with the audience and you, or we prefer to be behind the COVID wall of restraints and use Google and virtual reality, is not so much the question. The question is the underlying incentives and infrastructure who allows us to trust, trade, interact in a way which is censorship, not resistant as such, but at least transparent, which allows us to even the playing field, that is not about where you're born or what university you went on or those kind of things, what kind of color of your skin, but it's about inclusive access to technology. It's about enabling the human brains to come together in a community. And you can't do that in a centralized metaverse, because in a centralized metaverse, there is one entity who can change the ledger of everything you do in there. They hold the keys to your identity, to your interactions. And the more you do digital, the more important your digital footprint becomes. And then suddenly we're back to blockchain, because blockchain is one of the few alternatives of an infrastructure. You can actually build something which has a different operating model.
Okay, all right. So forget the metaverse then. Why do I keep associating cryptocurrencies then with the blockchain and Web3?
So it took me quite a long time to formulate the next sentence, but the sentence goes something like this. Blockchain, true blockchain, needs cryptocurrencies.
Okay.
Cryptocurrencies don't need blockchain. What I mean about that is that the security architecture of a very good blockchain, to enable what it does and what it does best, which is smart contracts, programmability, an immutable ledger, different security architecture, the entry barrier is what we call a utility token.
Isn't that just a fancy way of saying cryptocurrency, though?
Well, now we can look into MiCA, or we can look into the Swiss regulation or other things.
But practically, the way you look at it.
But practically speaking, unfortunately, utility tokens has been so affiliated with cryptocurrencies, and many people interact with it because they have a hope that it goes up in value or goes down, or it does something, or I can, transact one to many, many to one, and so on. But the actual purpose of these utility tokens is to access this decentralized brain, right?
Okay.
It is to allow us as humans to come together and take ownership and participate in the community.
But so you could say Bitcoin is a utility token then?
So Bitcoin is one of those things which is difficult, because in reality, Bitcoin unfortunately is ended up with one very, very strong use case. And that use case is one type of asset, so one asset, one type of an identity, and one governance model, okay? So when you go to the third generation blockchain, such as Cardano, we speak about a lot of different representations of values, not just cryptocurrencies, but all sorts of different things. It can be intellectual property right, it can be pharma life science with clinical trials, it can be sub-Saharan diabetes 2 drugs, which keep emptying the bottles and reselling them and then putting something else in it, and people die, right? Because when you buy it at the pharmacy and you think you're saving your life, right? But in reality, you're injecting something which is not there. So all sorts of different values can be represented on the blockchain.
But you still have a cryptocurrency called ADA, which hasn't been doing great, but I mean, just generally speaking, it's, you still have an incentive structure in there that...
Well, the incentive structure is actually not the ADA. The access key is the ADA. So if you access a database today, you pay normally you get it for free because they sell your data, right? But if you have a professional database, you actually pay a monthly subscription fee, or you pay a fee depending on the amount of bits and bytes you move across there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what ADA really does is enables all the functions of the blockchain. So there was some discussion about NFTs before. So in an Ethereum network, you have to do a smart contract to do an NFT.
And a smart contract is basically just a program that executes an agreement without the middleman, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
On Cardano, you don't need that. So you can do NFTs without smart contracts. And you can merge a whole set of metadata into that, including the regulatory information and including the identity or identities.
Mm-hmm.
So the story of the transaction. Now, why don't we just have the Cardano Foundation and you pay me a couple of $100 every single month for using Cardano?
Good question.
The thing is that if you want to have a real decentralized network, you want to have this situation where you just don't have one backup. You don't have one entity. You want to get to a situation that you have a hydra. And if you take out one head, the other heads still work. And you want to have sufficient amount of heads. And due to us being a proof of stake blockchain, meaning that the scarce resource is not electricity, and that means that the cost of an attack is different when you model it, you want to ensure that these people who operate the blockchain can be anonymous if they choose to be so. Therefore, you need a way to send value from the protocol to people who give a service to the blockchain in terms of security, in terms of running the node, in terms of verifying and validating that changes are not being made or should not be made, and adding data, right? So they do a real work, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need to be able to give them an incentive structure, which basically is the ADA token. And the ADA token also then allows you to do an NFT, do a smart contract, to do a supply solution, to do a student identity in Ethiopia, to plant 1 million trees in Kenya. So it's the way you access this system in a decentralized way by still protecting the system, not because you want to avoid regulation really, but you want to ensure that the attack vectors is as defined as possible.
But why is it that I always hear then, I mean, these are all noble causes that you're telling me about, but why is it then that I keep seeing that it's crypto exchanges with the big bucks and lobbying people in this town? Like, why haven't I seen you lobby more in this town?
Yeah, that's a good question, huh? I don't have the exact answer to that probably, but when you think about it, right? What should a crypto exchange really do? And now it probably will be a little bit unpopular, right? But what a crypto exchange really should do is it should give you access to cryptocurrencies and utility tokens through a fiat rail, right? So it's a way to access this new economy. Now, what they really do is they give you access to a financial asset. Most of the crypto exchanges don't allow you, at least the regulated ones and the large ones, they don't actually allow you to use the cryptocurrencies as intended.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a cryptocurrency where the intent of the cryptocurrency is you deploy it on the blockchain to verify a supply chain transaction, you can't do that. And the question is why?
Well, maybe I have an idea.
Yeah.
Is it like the forces of capitalism muddying your vision of what Web 3.0 and the blockchain is supposed to give?
Yeah, maybe it's just early success. Because what works really well on a blockchain is if it's born digital, it's maintained digital, and it dies digitally, well, it works really well on the blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
So when we went out and created an impact project to plant 1 million trees in Africa and put every single tree on the blockchain, and connecting that with Internet of Things and sensors and people on the ground who's monitoring those trees and giving a carbon credit on that, including the regulatory information, including all that data on a monthly basis being fed directly into the blockchain and distributed to the holders of this token, right? Something strange happened, right? A lot of exchanges didn't want to, have a token like that because, what is that really? And people don't want to trade that, right? Because that's actually something about real social impact, right? This is about creating a new start for a dying city in Kenya where people moved away because they took down the trees, right? There no trees, no roots in the water, no roots in the water, no fish. Population moved to this big city, no jobs, right? Child slavery, do whatever you can to feed your family, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard to say that's a crime, right? I mean, if you really cannot do anything and you have a family, you will go to a certain extent to do that. And I think what's important for us in blockchain world is that we need to take social responsibility, that everybody around the world can activate their brain and the community and start interacting with the blockchain. We should not create barriers towards that.
So you're kind of the hippie of the blockchain world. Is that fair?
I don't know if I'm the hippie of the blockchain world, but you can definitely say that Cardano's vision is a long-term vision about changing the systems of the world. That the medium and small income countries have equal right and equal access as the high income countries. And the high income countries have access to the small and the medium income countries. So we create a larger marketplace. And in a larger marketplace, if trust is there, good things tend to happen.
I wanted to kind of just very briefly kind of just like dig away at you a little bit on this. So I mean, before you mentioned you were a banker before, you also worked for PwC. I mean, that's kind of the capitalist world, right? And here you are talking about saving fish and trees in Kenya. Like, how did you make that shift? Like, it sounds like one world to the other.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, the shift was quite dominant. I mean, I had to explain to my daughter what I was doing in the middle of the night when she woke up with a nightmare. And it just blurted out of my mouth that I was earning money to a guy high up in the hierarchy, right?
Not so hippie.
Classically moving things in a pyramid-shaped form, right? We don't like to think about it like that in capital markets because greed is good. And at a certain time, you need to ask yourself a question. And this question is not a strict question, but it is going along the lines of, if you had the chance to change the world, would you take it? And on what premises would you take it? Now, I tried quite a few things in my life, and I have to say this is the first time I feel that I truly is sitting with a piece of technology who holds the promise to potentially change some of the fundamental things that's wrong with the world today.
Okay.
Does that mean that we will win? Probably not. But that's where we get into this beautiful thing about public source and open source software and about sharing and about, trying and not just hiding your failures, but putting your failures out there so people can learn from it.
And we'll get to that. I mean, so, okay, we have a general idea of what it is that you envision Web 3.0 is supposed to look like. And I mean, the causes that you mentioned, and when they all sound very noble. So, I mean, I guess you then must have a governance structure at Cardano, right? Which ensures that only good things happen and that, we make sure the bad guys don't use the technology for their nefarious reasons. I guess that's the way it's set up, no?
No, not really.
Oh.
So and that's a problem, specifically here in Brussels. Not just in Brussels, it's also a problem in Hong Kong, it's a problem in Singapore, it's a problem when I'm in Washington and so on. And it's about control. In reality, we would like to be able to control what people do and what they don't do. The reality is that it's really hard to control that because you need to set up some boundary conditions which is socially acceptable and can hold different stress tests. So what we're doing is we're thinking about it as a city. We provide the infrastructure in the city, but we don't define how people use the city. But we are hoping by showing and going first that we can show a good way to use the city, a way where the city flourishes, where the grass is green and people, can let the children play on the streets while they're doing commerce and while they're interacting, while they're thinking about big topics where innovation is flourishing. Now, if we would go in and say, oh, hold on, everybody who does a certain thing, they're criminals. We assume that our cultural understanding of social systems is the right one, and we should decide what's happening on the other side of the globe. And we don't think that's the right way of doing it.
But you did just say that we try to do good, so you must have a definition of what is good.
So we've chosen to take it a little bit further and say we need an external framework to define what good actually is. Because if we define what good is, then we are back to us playing, the almighty and saying, in and out, right?
Hanging out with Mark Zuckerberg and all that jazz, yeah.
That's probably very accurate, right? So we're we're taking the external framework of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So there are 17 development goals, and from the use cases from the Cardano Foundation, where the Cardano Foundation is going in and saying that we support, it tends to have a couple of the Sustainable Development Goals which you can tick off. And most people, unfortunately, are focusing on the easy ones, environmental impact, electricity these days, right? And we are proof of stake blockchain, so we get quite good around that. But what about the hard ones? What about the problem that 2 billion people in the world don't have an identity? And you know what? It's quite easy to give them a passport. So probably a solution is not just giving them a passport. There is a larger social problem, right? And so we're thinking about, how can we actually ensure that this blockchain technology is being used in ways we cannot imagine? Because we teach people, we allow people, and we enable people to cross over that divide and start enacting in a network who binds the world together. But that has this problem of governance, right? Because that means that we are not an intermediary who says you are in and you're out. So what can we expect from the policymakers then?
And we'll definitely talk about the policymakers, but I don't want to just shine away from the fact that you're still allowing a dark underbelly to emerge then in Cardano. Do you have examples? I mean, you've been a chief executive there for how long? At the
2
foundation,
years.
2 years.
Yeah.
So what kind of dark sides of the Cardano moon have you witnessed?
So on-chain, very little.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like there's nothing happening. It's not like it's a ghost chain or something like that. We have thousands of companies building, and we are a little bit young in terms of smart contracts and so on. But we actually on-chain has seen very little malicious behavior. We've seen very few things. And one of the biggest difference between Cardano and other blockchains is the fundamental architecture of Cardano is actually built on the people, when positively incentivized, will do good.
Okay. You stressed on-chain, so are you deliberately avoiding my question by not telling me what off-chain is?
So off-chain is that obviously there's a lot of things happening in the Reddit and Discord channels, and on Twitter and stuff like that. There we sometimes see some trolls and we see some mobbing and stuff like that, which is it's hard, right? The internet allows you to be anonymous, right? If you're too hard on somebody, you just create a new profile. You can't do that on blockchain. Well, you can create a new wallet, right? But anything you add to the blockchain, you cannot remove. And the beauty of that is that the longer a trail you have of your identity on the blockchain, the better you behave. Isn't that beautiful?
But couldn't I then technically, if let's say I didn't like an individual, let's say I didn't like a politician, and then I decided that I was going to set up a smart contract that, depending on this politician, is then elected into office, and you could then use that threshold for the smart contract based on an oracle, and you could then hire a hitman by using a smart contract on Cardano. That technically is possible, no?
That is technically possible, but you are relying on two other pieces of technology. One is the contracting of the actual hitman, right? So you have a fiat rail, or you have some kind of an end game. You have an end technology, in this case, the hitman, right? But yeah, that is technically possible. And we actually have seen something like that on the dark web and other blockchains. So it's definitely a use case that's been done. But it is quite interesting when you think about these kind of dark underbellies, right? We're using a lot of time to discuss regulation on blockchain. Blockchain is one of those few technologies which can't directly hurt you without an associated technology. Blockchain, as it stands itself, it's a ledger, right? It's an accounting system where it allows you to do beautiful things, allows you to disintermediate things and to enable trust. But if you think about artificial intelligence, well, at a certain stage, you will get over a certain limit, and then there's no way back. You are releasing the beast. You cannot go back, right? And I don't think we're spending too much time talking about how do we regulate artificial intelligence. We're spending a lot of time, however, to talk about how do we regulate something who today is very much around cryptocurrency, and tomorrow is about supply chain and about financial inclusion and about connecting the world. And the difference is here is that somebody on the previous panel spoke about a knowledge gap. It's about imagination, and it's about looking at what does it really do and what can it do. Blockchains is general ledger, right? With associated computing programming and associating applications to it, right? It's actually something most people, if they really think hard about it and have a little bit of time, they will get it.
I mean, people who might get it, I mean, obviously in the headlines, and I, I put my hands up in the air as representing all media here. Oftentimes it's the bad news that actually arrives at the news, right? And it's that news that kind of triggers policymakers into taking action. And so I'm just wondering, I mean, given the fact that you are taking this approach of saying, we're not going to police or say what's good and bad and how this blockchain should be used. I mean, governments might feel differently about that. I mean, do you anticipate that they're going to come over and just like crush you in red tape?
So what we're trying to do specifically at the Cardano and the Cardano Foundation is we want to take the best from the open source innovation, distributed innovation model, and we want to merge that with the decentralized operation of blockchains. So if we take those two business models together, you get something very interesting.
Wait, can we just pull those hands back? What's open source?
So many people, specifically in blockchain, talk about open source as saying, my source code is on GitHub. That means that people can verify and see what I'm doing, and therefore it's open source. And then they put what's called an open source license on top of it, which means that you can basically do a fork of the code and use that yourself without
copy paste the code, do your own thing.
But that's not really what makes open source special. What makes open source special is that you have an economic incentive of using the underlying code. So if you're building something on top of the Linux kernel, let's say a cool product, let's say the metaverse, for instance, right? So if you're building a metaverse solution who gets really big traction, and you're using Linux kernel as an operating system.
Can you just explain what the Linux kernel is?
That's an alternative operating system to Mac OS and so on, which happens to be running 80% of the internet, and nearly all industry servers is running it.
The operating system for the internet. Got you.
So what's happening is that people are then saying, oh, I'm earning a lot of money up here on my service, right, or my product I'm selling, but I also want to ensure that in 5 years' time, or in 10 years' time, that I still can develop my product and it gets, new features and so on. And to ensure that the underlying infrastructure, in this case, the operating system, they basically are sending some people down to sit in a committee, but also some people down who can start defining what is the problems, coming together with an aggregated roadmap based on the usage of the technology, right? And they can contribute to it through a structured process, saying, oh, so I would like to code an application who actually solves something for my value capture layer. And that means that the value creation layer gets stronger. When I'm then doing that down here in the value creation layer, somebody in Argentina can say, oh, that's an amazing feature. It might not be exactly the same use case as up in the value capture layer, but a new use case. And that means that the value capture layer sees a flourishment of new applications. You have more eyes in the code, and you have what we think about as decentralized innovation without directly having one person or one entity saying, you need to develop that, you need to develop that. And that means that suddenly you have a system who can encompass millions of people's use cases as long as they have enough value in the traditional capital world and selling and offering services, right? As long as this up here is working, right? They are incentivized to contribute down here because there's a path in where they can contribute to the innovation. Not just the direction, but the innovation.
But how do governments get involved in that?
So governments are already involved in this because they, as anybody else, can actually be a part of that feature request.
In Europe?
Yes, all over the world. Now, will they do it? Are they doing it? Is two different things. So yes, governments are already doing that. So we are seeing that politicians, it's mainly not the politicians, it's mainly the cabinets. And in Singapore, there's a company called Elevandi, which is just below the central bank and the regulator there, right, which is created as an innovation arm because they need to have the possibility of doing stuff like that, right? So instead of being the only tool in the book is to regulate, you now have another tool in the book, which is that you can participate in the request and you can even put coders to do certain things will then go into the software stack, which will allow you to protect your citizens, enable economic growth, and you can be a part of steering the roadmap without regulating the usage, right? Mm-hmm. So this actually, in a weird format, because blockchain started about, libertarianism and about, how do we, take control of our own life and cut everybody else away. But when you start moving that open governance together with the open source world, right? So what we learned from Catalyst and voting on blockchains and MakerDAO and a lot of other things, when we start moving those two things together, we are actually enabling people to have a say in how the blockchains are working, and we are enabling them to contribute. And that will then allow them to choose whether we're going to use the blockchain or just the code repository.
So just to say, we've run out of time, but I'm taking my 5 minutes back that I lost. So no, it's all good. I'm sorry for the organizers, but I'm not done with this conversation. No, okay. So no, specifically then, if you then encourage governments to then get involved in this open source approach of governance, I mean, isn't there still a risk that they might overdo it?
Well, that's the beauty with democracy, right? And the beauty with open source is that everything you do in open source doesn't necessarily, at least in the blockchain realm, end on the actual mainnet. But the fact that you have different opinions and you are having a process where you can have these discussions based on the utility value up here in the value capture layer is incentivizing them to do it. And we see that not as governmental officials, but because politicians care, they are already approaching us and saying, oh, you know what, Fred? For the new CBDC of country X, cannot mention the name, this is the 5 features we would like to have. How do we ensure that comes into your roadmap, right? So we actually see that there's the willingness already to do that. And I think what we have to do in blockchain is we need to enable them to be able to participate in this decentralized innovation, which then runs on a decentralized operation, which really is what the stake pool operators on the blockchain does for the security, right? And then suddenly we're bringing the best of these two worlds together, and we're now enabling the politicians to have another mean of influencing the technology than just regulating. So we're giving them more tools in the box.
Okay. So we have run out of time, but I know it was a very heavy subject. I know it's late in the day. So I think very, very briefly, within 30 seconds, I just want to make sure that people are still light on their feet and they walk away with this more than just knowing what open source is. So I've prepared a quick little quick fire round of questions for you, which you got to answer in one word. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. Danish pastry or Danish hot dogs?
Pastry.
Terrible answer. Are you paid in fiat or crypto?
Choice.
Okay. Do you drive a Lamborghini or a Ferrari?
Toyota.
Will crypto save the world?
No, but blockchain.
That was my next question. Will blockchain save the world?
Humans will save the world, but blockchain will enable it.
Okay, and then very finally, who would win in a fight, Batman or Superman?
Superman.
Ladies and gentlemen, Frederik Gregaard.
Thank you guys. Thank you, Bjarke, also for ending on that very nice note. Thank you, Frederik, for the great talk.